The Book of Judges is a hard read. It's not a pretty story, it's gritty, it's violent. It's full of people making terrible choices, but sometimes the hardest stories are the ones that teach us the most important things. And what Judges screams, from beginning to end, is this: we desperately need a king. Not just any king, but, a good one. A righteous one. A leader who can bring order out of chaos, justice out of injustice, and guide people away from their worst impulses. The book tells the story of Israel after Joshua dies, before they have a real king. It's a time when everyone, and I mean everyone, seems to be doing what was right in his own eyes. And the results are catastrophic. You see this phrase: in those days there was no king in Israel, everyone did what was right in his own eyes, 4 times at the end of the book. It's like the author is hitting you over the head with it. It's not just a description, it's an explanation. It's the reason everything goes so wrong. Let's start at the beginning of the book, after Joshua. God had given Israel the land, he had given them his laws, he had promised to be their God, and they his people. But they didn't really settle into that promise very well. They failed to drive out all the enemies like God told them to. As they got lazy, they started mixing with the locals, adopting their gods, their ways. This leads to a repeating pattern, a cycle you see again and again in Judges. Israel sins. They turn away from God. Because of their sin, God allows other nations to oppress them. They suffer. They cry out to God. God, in his mercy, raises up a judge, a military leader, a deliverer. The judge saves them, and there's peace for a while. Then the judge dies, and Israel goes right back to sinning, often worse than before. This cycle, while it shows God's faithfulness in responding to their cries, also highlights Israel's deep problem. They can't seem to stay faithful. They need someone to keep them on track, to lead them, to teach them, to enforce God's laws. They need a steady hand. They don't have it. Think about the first few judges. Othniel brings a brief period of peace, but it doesn't last. Ehud, the left-handed hero, cleverly kills the fat king Eglon. It's a dramatic story, but the relief is temporary. Deborah, prophetess and judge, along with Barak, brings a great victory. There's a wonderful song of celebration. It feels like things are looking up. But these are individual acts of deliverance, not a lasting system of governance. They are temporary fixes. The underlying problem of a scattered, disobedient people remains. There's no central authority to truly unite them and guide them in God's ways. Then we get to Gideon. His story starts with God calling him while he's hiding, threshing wheat in a winepress to avoid the Midianites. He's afraid, he doubts. But God empowers him. He tears down his father's altar to Baal. He raises a small army, God reduces it to 300 men, and they win a miraculous victory. This is a big moment. The people are so impressed, they come to Gideon and say, "Rule over us, you and your son and your grandson, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian." This is a key point. They want a king. They recognize the need for a sustained leader after such a great deliverance. But Gideon says no. He says, "I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you." Now, on the surface, that sounds like a good, pious answer. He's saying God is the ultimate king. And that's true. But what Gideon does after that is very telling. He may have said he wouldn't be king, but he certainly acted like one. He asked for gold earrings from the plunder, and he made an ephod from them. This ephod, a priestly garment, became an object of worship, a snare to Gideon and his family, and to all Israel. They went whoring after it. He had many wives and many sons, which was typical of kings in that culture. He lived like a ruler. He just didn't take the title, and by not taking the title and establishing a clear, God-sanctioned leadership structure, he leaves a vacuum. And what fills that vacuum? His son, Abimelech. Abimelech is a direct result of Gideon's ambiguous leadership and the lack of a proper king. Abimelech decides he will be king, but he does it in the worst possible way. He goes to Shechem, his mother's family, and asks, "Which is better for you, that 70 persons, all the sons of Jerubbaal, Gideon's other name, rule over you, or that one person rule over you?" He then murders all 70 of his half-brothers on one stone, except for Jotham, the youngest, who escapes. This is a brutal, ruthless power grab. Abimelech becomes a self-proclaimed king, but he's a terrible, bloody tyrant. He embodies the danger of human ambition, unchecked by divine law or moral constraint. His reign is brief and violent, marked by betrayal and further bloodshed, culminating in his own ignominious death when a woman drops a millstone on his head. The story of Abimelech is a dark warning. It shows what happens when there is no king, and then a man tries to force himself into the role, doing what is right in his own evil eyes. It's a taste of the tyranny that can emerge when leadership is seized rather than God-appointed and righteous. This episode makes the cry for a good king even louder. After Abimelech, things don't get better. We have a few minor judges, then Jephthah. Jephthah's story is heartbreaking and deeply unsettling. He's an outcast, the son of a prostitute, driven away by his half-brothers. When the Ammonites threaten Israel, the elders of Gilead come begging him to lead them. He agrees, but not before striking a deal to be their head and commander. This shows how desperate they were. When Jephthah makes a rash vow to God, if God gives him victory, he will sacrifice whatever comes out of his house first to meet him. Of course, it's his only daughter, his virgin daughter, who comes out, and because of his vow, he feels compelled to go through with it. This is a terrible act, born of a pagan mindset rather than true faith in God. It shows the low spiritual state of the people and their leaders, but the chaos doesn't stop there. After the victory, the tribe of Ephraim gets angry because they weren't called to fight. They threaten Jephthah. This isn't external enemies anymore. This is Israel fighting Israel. Jephthah responds fiercely. They fight, and the men of Gilead kill 42,000 Ephraimites using the Shibboleth test. This internal tribal warfare is a clear sign of a nation falling apart. There's no one to mediate, no one to bring the tribes together, no central authority to keep the peace. Everyone is looking out for themselves, doing what they think is right, even if it means killing their own people. This absolute breakdown of unity and order screams for a king, someone to bring the tribes together and enforce a peace based on God's law. Then comes Samson. Samson is another example of wasted potential and profound personal failure. He's called from birth to be a Nazirite, set apart for God. He's given superhuman strength by the Spirit of the Lord. His mission is to begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines, but Samson is completely driven by his own desires. He always sees a woman he wants, usually a Philistine woman, against his parents' wishes and God's law. His story is less about national deliverance and more about his personal vendettas, his uncontrollable lusts, and his repeated failures to live up to his calling. He's a powerful individual, but a terrible leader. He doesn't gather an army, he doesn't unite the tribes, he doesn't set an example of righteousness. He's an isolated figure, using his strength for personal revenge, not for the systematic liberation or spiritual guidance of Israel. His life is a series of self-indulgent acts, betrayals, and ultimately, a tragic end. He's a judge who cannot even judge himself, let alone his nation. His story perfectly illustrates the idea of everyone did what was right in his own eyes on a personal level. He did what felt good to him, what his eyes desired, regardless of the consequences or God's will. And because he did, Israel remained under Philistine oppression, needing a king who could truly lead them out. After Samson, the book descends into its darkest chapters. These are the stories where that key phrase, "In those days there was no king in Israel, everyone did what was right in his own eyes," starts appearing explicitly. And when you read these stories, you understand why the author repeats it. First, there's the story of Micah and the Danites in Judges 17 and 18. This is a tale of religious anarchy. Micah, a man from Ephraim, steals 1,100 shekels of silver from his mother. When he confesses, she forgives him and consecrates the silver to the Lord to make a carved image and a molded image. So, Micah sets up his own private shrine with idols, an ephod, and household gods. He then hires a wandering Levite to be his priest. This whole setup is completely against God's law. God had commanded one central place of worship, the tabernacle, with his appointed priest. But Micah does what he wants, he does what is right in his own eyes, creating his own religion. Then, the tribe of Dan, looking for new territory because they failed to conquer their allotted land, sends out spies. They happen to stop at Micah's house, recognize the Levite's voice, and inquire of him. He blesses them. Later, the 600 armed Danites come back. They steal Micah's idols, his ephod, and persuade his hired Levite to come with them, promising him a better job as a priest to a whole tribe instead of just one household. Micah protests, but what can you do? The Danites are stronger. They establish their stolen religious system in their new territory, the city of Laish, which they renamed Dan, complete with the stolen images and the hired Levite. This is a complete brazen disregard for God's law, for property rights, for religious purity. It's a free-for-all, and the text tells us, in those days there was no king in Israel. Judges chapter 17, verse 6 and 18:1. This is the direct cause of this religious and moral chaos. There's no one to enforce God's law, no one to say, this is wrong, you cannot do this. Everyone does whatever they feel like doing. And then we get to the absolute bottom, the most horrific story in the entire book, the Levite and his concubine in Judges 19 to 21. This story is so disturbing, so vile. It makes the reader recoil. It begins with a Levite whose concubine leaves him and goes back to her father's house. The Levite goes to bring her back, and her father feasts him for 3 days, then 4, then 5. The Levite finally leaves with his concubine and his servant. They travel late and stop in Gibeah, a city in the tribe of Benjamin. They choose to stay in the town square because no one offers them hospitality. Finally, an old man, also a sojourner, invites them into his home. While they are eating, the wicked men of the city surround the house, demanding that the old man bring out the Levites so they can know him, a euphemism for rape. The old man offers his own virgin daughter and the Levites' concubine instead. This is already a morally depraved situation, showing a complete breakdown of hospitality and human decency. But then, the Levite himself pushes his concubine out the door to the mob. They abuse her all night. In the morning, the Levite finds her dead on the doorstep. His response is ghastly. He puts her on his donkey, travels home, and then cuts her body into 12 pieces, sending a piece to each of the 12 tribes of Israel. This is an act designed to shock the nation into action, to demand justice for this unspeakable crime. The tribes are indeed horrified. They gather together, demanding answers from Gibeah and the tribe of Benjamin. But Benjamin refuses to hand over the wicked men. Instead, Benjamin rallies for war against the other tribes. This leads to a devastating civil war. Israel fights Benjamin, and Benjamin nearly wiped out. But the story isn't over. They had vowed not to give their daughters to Benjamin in marriage. Now they realize Benjamin will die out. So, they come up with another solution. They discover that the people of Jabesh-Gilead did not come to the assembly, so they slaughter most of them, taking 400 virgins for the remaining Benjamite men. But that's not enough. They then tell the remaining 200 Benjamite men to go to the annual feast at Shiloh, and when the young women come out to dance, to abduct them and take them as wives. This whole episode, from the initial rape and murder to the Levites' horrific act to the civil war to the abduction of women, is a spiraling descent into moral abyss. It's an utter failure of justice, law, and human decency. It's a nation tearing itself apart, behaving worse than the pagan nations around them. And the book ends with that damning summary. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Judges chapter 19, verse 1 and 21-25. The repetition of that phrase is crucial. It's not just a historical observation. It's the narrator's commentary on the entire state of affairs. It's the diagnosis for all the chaos, depravity, the violence, the disunity. When there is no authority, no standard, no one to enforce God's law, humanity, left to its own devices, spirals into darkness. Everyone becomes their own standard of right and wrong, and the result is a society where the strong prey on the weak, where justice is abandoned, and where God's commands are ignored. So how does the book of Judges show our desperate need for a king? It does it by painting a vivid, ugly picture of life without one. It shows, one, the breakdown of moral standards. When there's no king, there's no central authority to uphold God's law. People invent their own religion. Micah commit horrific sexual violence, Gibeah, and act with utter depravity. Right in his own eyes means there's no objective right or wrong. 2. The absence of justice who punishes the wicked men of Gibeah. No one until the other tribes are forced to act. Who protects the innocent? No one. Justice is arbitrary, often achieved through violence or not at all. A king is needed to establish and enforce a system of justice based on God's laws. There's no one to unite them, to mediate disputes, to provide a common vision or purpose. They are a collection of disparate groups, not a cohesive nation. A king is needed to bring them together. There was no sustained military strategy, no standing army, no consistent leader to protect the borders or rally the people effectively. A king is needed to lead and protect the nation. 5, the inability to lead themselves spiritually, the constant turning to idols, the compromises, the failure to remember God's faithfulness. The people needed a leader who would remind them of their covenant with God, tear down idols, and encourage true worship. As the book of Judges, in its raw honesty, makes a powerful case for the necessity of leadership. It creates a longing, a yearning in the reader for someone, anyone, to step in and bring order. It makes the reader understand why, later, the people would clamor for a king, even if their motives for wanting a king were sometimes flawed, wanting to be like all the nations. The book isn't arguing for just any king. Abimelech showed the dangers of a self-appointed, unrighteous king. It's arguing for a king who would rule justly according to God's laws, a king who would unite the nation, protect them from enemies, and most importantly, lead them in righteousness and faithfulness to God. It's looking for a king who would act as God's representative on earth, guiding the people according to God's will, not their own selfish desires. Ultimately, the book of Judges points beyond even the flawed human kings of Israel, like Saul, or even David and Solomon, in their failings to an ideal. It foreshadows the perfect king, the true shepherd, the righteous ruler who would one day come. It points to the Messiah, Jesus Christ, the king who perfectly embodies justice, righteousness, and unwavering faithfulness to God. He is the one who truly brings order out of chaos, who establishes ultimate justice, and who leads his people not by force, but by love and truth. So, When we read Judges, we don't just see ancient history. We see a mirror reflecting humanity's desperate need for a guiding hand, for a moral compass beyond ourselves. We see the consequences of everyone doing what is right in his own eyes. And that, whether we acknowledge it or not, is a need that still resonates today. We need a king, a true king, to lead us away from the chaos of our own desires and into the light of divine order. The book of Judges makes that clear, through every hard, heartbreaking story.